Lou, how are you, my man?
Glenn, I'm doing better than I deserve. You know, I tell people at my age, any day above ground is a good day.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. So, do you remember having that conversation where you said the clock is ticking?
I do. I remember that, Glenn. I sure do.
So, what did you mean by that?
Well, look, in the world of national security, the clock is always ticking. What do I mean by that? Well, you know, there are foreign adversaries out there that are very much involved in the research of UAP like we are, just like our country. And what you don't want to do is allow ourselves to get to a point of what we call strategic surprise, right? All of a sudden you have country X or country Y out there that may not necessarily be friendly to the U.S., and all of a sudden they find they have a breakthrough, right? So China has already admitted they have their own UAP program, so does Russia. And what we don't want to do is allow ourselves to fall behind some of our adversaries' capabilities. Now, there's also another part of that conversation, too. What you don't want to do is allow so much time to go by that by the time you are forced to make a decision, all your options you've exhausted. Meaning, let's say that there is an announcement, let's say later this year, that life has been discovered somewhere else off of Earth, right? You don't want to be in a situation as a government where you are caught flat-footed and surprised, right? And by that statement, you want to be as proactive as possible. You want to be able to have the conversation, socialize the idea with your citizens, because let's face it, governments writ large are the reason why they have the authority they do is because people have faith and confidence in those institutions, in those governments. And the last place any government wants to be is on their back foot, right? In a situation where they get surprised, and now, like we saw, for example, with the drone incursions that we had back in 2024 up in New Jersey, right? First, the White House says there's nothing to see here, folks, and they say, well, actually, there is something to see here. Well, actually, all of these drones have been coordinated through the FAA. Well, no, they haven't. We don't even know if they're drones at this point. Or the Chinese spy balloon, right, under the Biden administration. That's another case in point where decisions were made on our behalf because we simply didn't want to face the uncomfortable truth that China was sending reconnaissance balloons over North America completely unchallenged.
So you started this out with imagine country X or Y. So are you saying that we're possibly facing something from another country?
Well, I think all is possible. All cards have to remain on the table until they're not. I think there is enough information to suggest that other countries are heavily invested in this topic. But keep in mind, we've been dealing with this now for decades. And when I say decades, at least 8 decades. That's 80 years. We've been dealing with this phenomenon. And if you look 80 years ago, where was Russia? Well, the United States had just entered the atomic age. We had barely broken the sound barrier. No one has been into space. And that means some country secretly was developing this technology and was able to perfect it 8 decades ago. So that doesn't make sense, right? If that was the case, this would be considered the worst intelligence failure in the history of our nation, eclipsing that of even 9/11, because that means for 80 years, some country in secret has been developing this technology and, oh, by the way, has been able to deploy it over controlled U.S. airspace, over our sensitive military facilities, and there's not a darn thing we can do about it. So when you look back at this from a temporal aspect or a time aspect, it simply doesn't make sense that all of this, what we're seeing, is Russian or Chinese. It doesn't pass the smell test.
You're not the only one that said this. 2027 keeps coming up, and you just said later this year or in 2027. Why is 2027 the year that everybody keeps throwing around? Because it doesn't seem random to me. Everybody seems to be saying 2027.
Yeah, I've heard 2027. I also heard 2036. The capacity in which I heard it, I'd rather not get into. I heard it when I was working with U.S. Space Force, but it was to me it seemed more anecdotal. So I'm probably not best suited to answer that time-wise, simply because I didn't come up with that time frame.
Okay.
But I heard that as well, and certainly something we need to pay attention to.
So, the Laura Trump just came out and said there's a speech for the president to give, and he's prepared to give it at some point. Is that a speech? Do you think she's referring to a speech that that every president has had, or is this something that is prepared for this time, do you think?
I think it's probably something prepared for this time, simply because a lot of presidents were kept in the dark on this topic for a very long time, and I don't think they took it seriously. Certainly this president, during his first term, initially when he was asked, kind of laughed it off, and then later, from my understanding, he received some briefings and then took it quite seriously afterwards. But look, it's a very risky topic. Any president that makes a public statement about this topic runs a huge risk, simply because there's a lot of unknowns, and it has never really been good for one's career necessarily, or even the media, up until recently, to even cover this topic, because the amount of stigma and taboo that have been associated, purposefully, by the way, on this topic, on purpose. Our own government created this taboo unnecessarily, to give it the flexibility to actually do research. A lot of people are surprised when they find out that ATIP was actually a program in the Pentagon that was studying UFOs. That's what my colleagues and I were told to do. And you said it absolutely correct. I was never a quote-unquote believer. I went through the medical program at University of Miami, and technically I graduated in microbiology and immunology. So the scientific method for me is very important. Also, as an intelligence officer, you have to let the facts speak for themselves. However, with that said, there comes a point where you have so much overwhelming evidence, and you have some of the most sophisticated capabilities, technologically speaking, in the intelligence community, that normally can identify the difference between an F-16 and, let's say, a MiG-25 from 25 miles away. These same sensor systems are being used to collect information on things that, frankly, we don't understand. Technologically speaking, these things can outperform anything we have in our inventory, and that is a national security issue. And I believe that our president has been made aware of that, and not just by the Department of War either. There's other elements, the FBI, the intelligence community, even the Department of Energy, that all have equity in this topic.
One of my researchers said the reason why the government is so afraid of all of this coming out is because if there is technology that we got from someplace else, and it was shared with certain companies, then other companies will start suing and saying, well, I didn't get any of that. That's an unfair advantage. Do you think there's anything to that?
Yeah,
fear?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's back, with the military-industrial complex, there's still rules and laws that have to be followed, and you have to have free and fair competition. That is how this system works. And if it turns out that maybe some general somewhere in the halls of the Pentagon gave a company an unfair advantage, you can imagine in 10 years, 20 years, Company A becomes a multi-billion-dollar aerospace company, where Company B goes bankrupt, 200 jobs are lost, and investors, lose their investment, right? So there's Securities Exchange Commission violations. I mean, you could, in theory, rack up not just billions, but trillions of dollars worth of liability and damages. So that is a very real issue. That is absolutely correct.
One last thing. You were on the podcast with me, and you talked about a spiritual element of all of this. That I think you said you walked into a meeting and the scientists were talking about something spiritual, and we didn't really get into it. Can you share that again?
Sure. Well, let me just say this, Glenn, if I can. I think ultimately the human experience is a spiritual experience. There's no way around it. A lot of people say that we're humans having a spiritual experience. I tend to think we are spiritual beings having a human experience. But that aside,
agree.
There were elements in the Pentagon that believe that what we were looking into were actually demons. And there were some fundamentalists that believed that this was all the work of so to speak, the devil. Now, I can't, between you and me, and I guess now everybody else, I can't necessarily fault them for thinking that, because if that is their spiritual perspective, then I can understand it. And there are elements certainly within this topic that may scare some people, but I don't know that to be true.
Like, can you tell me,
Sure. Yeah, there were people in the Pentagon that believe that UFOs. Not only did they say they were real, they actually told me to my face and my colleagues, but that we shouldn't be looking into them because they are demons. They're demonic. They are. We know exactly what they are. And again, some of these people were very, very senior in the intelligence community. Some of them were friends of mine. And although I don't agree with their perspective, look, at the end of the day, I can't prove that they're wrong either. So I respect it. I don't agree with it, but I can respect that fear that this topic brings. Because
do you have any idea why they would say something like that?
Well, what was told to me point blank was, Lou, have you read your Bible lately? And I said, well, I thought I was, pretty familiar with it. Why? And he said, well, then you would know, because what we're dealing with are demons and we shouldn't be looking into them. And that was the extent of that conversation I had with a senior leader in the U.S. government. But there were others as well who felt the same way. There's a lot of people that also can point to the Bible, and they'll talk about Ezekiel's wheel, right, as being actually an interpretation of an encounter with a UAP. So I spent some time at the Vatican, and I'll share this. That was kind of interesting, and I'll make it quick. There they opened a scroll. It was a very old parchment. It was in Latin, and one of the senior academics there at the Vatican said, "Look here, read this part." And it talked about eclipus. Eclipus is a Latin word for, think of eclipse, and it was the word they were using for the Roman shields, because the Roman shields were round and lenticular, and they looked, I guess, like suns. And he said, here it is, and this was a discussion between a Roman soldier and a Roman general, where they described these flaming Roman shields in the sky that would follow them from battle space to battle space, and so. This is going way back, and this is a document that's in the possession of the Vatican itself. So the Vatican has also had a deep interest in this topic. The last pope actually said, I believe, several years ago, that we should not be surprised that life exists and is abundant in the universe. That God has the ability to create as many species as he wants. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we are any less special.
Lou, it's always fascinating to talk to you. We'll keep watching. Thank you so much.
All right, Glenn. My honor and privilege. Thank you so much.
You bet. Former Pentagon UAP official, the guy who led the search here recently. A lot of the breaking news comes from him. Luis Elizondo.
Thank you for thinking for yourself and being part of a movement, because that's really what all of this is. If you want the full story, you want to go deeper, go to blazetv.com/Glenn. Go there right now, sign up, no interruptions, just the truth, uncensored and unfiltered. Don't just watch, take a stand. And I'll see you over there in a minute.